do when a team works hard, communicates consistently, and still isn't reaching its true potential. In this episode, communication strategist and CEO Lee Caraher breaks down why most workplace conflict isn't a people problem, it's a language problem, while saying it once is never enough, and how fixing the way your team communicates could recover nearly 20% of the productivity you're silently losing every single day. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. We discuss ancient wisdom, real-world experiences, and the latest concepts on mastering leadership of self and others. If you're committed to maximizing your life and your impact on the world, you're home. Welcome to the No Limit Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Sean Patton. Today, I am joined by Lee Caraher. She's a communication strategist, CEO of Double Forte, an author who helps leaders and teams communicate clearly so work actually works. With over 25 years of advising organizations through growth, change, and conflict, she is known for helping leaders say what they really mean, especially when the stakes are high. She's the author of Millennials and Management and the Boomerang Principle, and a leading voice on building strong, no jargon, high-performing teams. Lee, thanks for being on today.
Sean, thanks for having me.
This is super exciting and very, fortuitous to have this conversation now, because I've been doing a lot of reflection on the clarity of my own communication with clients, on branding, even with this podcast. So I know I'm going to get a lot out of this through our conversation, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. So when you think about the problems or the struggles in clear communication inside of teams, what do you see as the thing that, is there one or two or three things that sort of always are top of the list that we get wrong?
Always.
Okay, cool.
Always. So I think the first is that we come into a team and we assume that our words mean the same thing, regardless of where we came from. And good teams have the same language. So if you come from the Northwest or the Southeast, or you have a military background or you don't, or all the things, a word could mean something very different to you and me, even though it's the same word. So the first thing that any good team has to have is a common language, like understanding what, and so we use jargon like end of day, which is the dumbest thing we can possibly say in this world right now. Because what does that mean? What time zone am I in? What actually is end of day? All those things. So every team has to have a common language. So that when you say red, it means red, 472 from the color scheme. Because it and I think that most conflict doesn't happen on purpose, right? Most conflict happens because we assume. And you know what assumptions mean? They make an ass out of you and me. So that's the first thing, a common language. And then two is to drive anything that is ambiguous out of your instruction. So like I just said, end of day it means one thing to a boomer, and it actually doesn't mean anything to a millennial or a Gen Z. And the reason is because, when it was a 9 to 5 work day and we didn't work remote, end of day was 9 to 5. So 5 was the end, right? But the number one deadline for students for the last 15, 20 years has been 11:59 p.m. And you send it digitally, right? That was not an option when I was in college. Those were not options. So, they get into the workplace and you say, oh, give it to me at the end of the day. They're in Hawaii, you're in Boston, and they send it to you at 11:59 p.m. from Hawaii. So they're right and they're wrong. And it's our job, whoever's giving the instruction, is to drive as much clarity into those nebulous things that could mean something very different. So deadlines, I think, are the number one cause of conflict in the workplace. So you just have to drive it out. So it's Tuesday at noon Pacific time by email in a Google link. So you have the time, the date, the time zone, and the format and what you want. And you can't misunderstand that. So it's your job as a communicator, wherever you sit in the organization, to drive that clarity into the ask or into the instruction. Because the worst thing you can do as a leader is to let someone be wrong and right at the same time. Don't let them be wrong and right. I was right. I gave it to you at 11:59. That's the end of the day. Well, it's not end of my day.
Yeah.
You didn't say my day. You said the day. And that is a function, that wasn't as much of a deal when it was just 9 to 5 in the office, but it is a total deal today. So common language and specificity. And if we can get those things down. And then the third thing is that we assume that if I just say it once, everyone will get it. And one and done does not work. Ever.
I love that. You know what came from me? You mentioned, turning in papers digitally and all that.
Mhm.
And this tradition is still holds true at West Point. And at West Point, there's this really cool tradition called the Soc Run. So like
Okay.
one of your core classes is like social sciences, whatever. And so they call it Soc. And there's this big final paper and everyone has to do it. And it's like, like a 60, 70 page paper. And it's like 70% of your grade. And
Gosh.
over time, after like 200 years of that West Point, like last 100 years, you would see people and it was due at like 1 p.m. on the same Friday, running, with their folded hand. And so they turned into this really cool tradition
Yeah.
where now everyone like dresses up and they
Oh,
line it
okay,
up
right?
like a parade and everyone's
Oh my God.
cheering. And like, there'll
You
be
don't
like
want to be at the end of that parade because what if they're late?
well, that's the funny part, right? It's like, like a half hour out before, there's like an upperclassman who's in like a mail or laundry cart, like getting
Uh-huh.
pulled like a chariot by a bunch of freshmen, to like turn it in. And it's like this big over the
That's
top fun
awesome.
thing. And
That's
if you stick around long enough though, the last like 10 minutes is the actual
mayhem,
people who are like actually
chaos,
sprinting, who actually are like late.
sweating in their pajamas,
And everyone's cheering them on. Yeah. So it's, that's a cool tradition that still
But
holds true
that's
at
the
West Point.
tradition, right?
Stop. You can't afford to keep operating this way. You're a smart, successful leader, and right now you're stuck. You know it. And that feeling, it's not weakness. That's data telling you something needs to change. Here's the truth. Saying stuck isn't neutral. It's costing you mentally, professionally, every single day. After 10 years coaching C-suite level executives through exactly problems like this, I have built the GAIN framework, and it delivers clarity in just 20 minutes. Sign up for the No Limit Leadership newsletter and get the Unstuck Guide free. The link is in the description. 5 seconds to change everything. Do it now.
So you come in and you find out about, if you didn't know, I mean, I assume people who go to West Point, they know so much about the traditions of West Point because it's just part of the lore, right? But imagine if you're there and your first time, like, what the hell is happening? Like, oh my God. Right. So, but that's the common language. The common language is that you have this lore, that you have this tradition that is part of your experience. Well, a new person jumping in and they maybe they just got placed. I know this doesn't happen. What if this, like someone from outer space gets placed at West Point and they go, what is going on? And for teams, this is true, right? You have a team of 10 maybe, and the nine, and someone retires or someone leaves. Now you have 9 people who know everything and a new person comes in. They know nothing. So you got to start all over again and explain to this person all of the language, all of the traditions, all of the things so that they can participate fully. Otherwise, they'll always be an outsider. That's one of the hardest things you can do when there is every team has its own code, It may not be written down.
So I recently, just 6 months ago or so, moved my coaching practice under a larger firm called Novus Global. It's been great for me. I've really enjoyed being part of a team. But to your point, they have a very formalized onboarding process, and they do have a lot of jargon, but it's codified. They literally give you like a glossary. You're like, here's what this means. And and so is that something that, I guess my question would be, there's trying to maybe avoid having jargon or SOPs altogether. Although if it's something that makes the team more efficient, if everybody's on the same page, maybe it makes sense. So
not everything makes sense, but a lot of it makes sense.
Okay. So then if you have that, are you okay with like onboarding clear glossary? Like someone sees a message, I don't know what that means. Like, hey, reference that. Is that a strong tool to create?
Strong tool. I mean, so SOPs, everyone has SOP. There's not a team that doesn't have an SOP, like what happens at the beginning of the month, what happens at the end of the month, what happens on Tuesday, whatever they are, right? So even if it wasn't, even if it was this is how the month looks. This is what you can anticipate in a month regularly. This, and this, because everyone has something, right? And then the glossary, it ends up being something that can be a really binding experience for the team, right? So that you don't have to, you have all the shortcuts. Because, in my family, my father's a cardiac surgeon, and we didn't say please and thank you in my family, ever. Because please and thank you is implied. Because, Lee, if I have to say please and thank you every single time someone gives me a scalpel, someone might die. Literally, that's how I grew up. And I got into the workplace, and I didn't say please and thank you. And then I scored the worst. I was at Weber Shandwick. There's 39 VPs or EVPs, same level. I scored the worst. on this. And I was devastated. I'm like, what do you mean I'm the nicest person on the planet? What are you talking about? You never say please and thank you. I'm like, it's implied. And I thought everyone grew up that way. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had to
Wow.
learn how to say please and thank you. So we all
Wow.
have something.
Yeah, and we all hear about, different cultural backgrounds.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, with remote and teams, distributed teams,
Mhm.
also with just a global population that is completely
Yeah.
mobile now, you have these different backgrounds. And so often you think, well, this person is from, somewhere far away, like they're from like
Yeah.
Eastern Europe or they're from Africa or they're Asia. So like
Right.
that's a cultural difference. But here's something that's like, Midwest America just
Yeah.
happens to be the daughter of a surgeon. And so
Right.
look at this cultural
Yeah.
difference.
We all have
Wow.
things. So I think that's the onboarding onto a team, even if like you're interdepartmental, the onboarding onto a team is super important, super, super important. And then
Mm.
I guess the last piece is it's gotta be okay to ask a question. So
Ah.
in my company, I say you only get in trouble when you don't ask questions because we can't assume that everyone understands everything. We shouldn't assume that because even though we're communicators by trade, doesn't mean that we're 100% on it. No one's 100% on it. So if you get an instruction that you don't understand and you just go forward and it comes in wrong, because probably 50-50, you're getting it right. So that means 50% of the time you're getting it wrong, which is an F,
Yeah.
right? You get in trouble, there's not 50 lashes, but that's when you get in trouble. You get a dressing down when you don't ask a question, when you don't have the answer, when you don't know. If
Yeah.
people ever say, I assumed, I just look at them and I'm like, really? Really? Let's come back. You go away, come back and talk to me,
Yeah.
because this is a safe place to ask questions. What you
Mm.
just experienced was me not getting a question.
Right.
So
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
two things, yeah.
Well, and I think you're bringing up a great point here. It's something that I work constantly with leaders and companies that I work with, which is this avoidance of the uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm hearing in that situation is this
Mhm.
person knew they were unclear, probably, didn't ask
Mhm.
questions because they're trying to avoid the short-term discomfort
Yeah.
of maybe
Not
showing that
knowing,
they don't know. Yeah. Or even just like
being the dumb one, right?
exactly. Yeah. And so, um, yeah, that's a really great point. That's like occurs to me to set that standard early
Mhm.
and for individuals, like flexing that muscle as early as possible in
Yeah.
your career, like as a student, as like get
Yeah.
comfortable being
Raising your
asking
hand.
questions and showing
Yeah.
that because you don't want it to show up when you're the VP.
Right. Well, another way a leader, someone whoever's leading the charge on this can say, instead of saying any questions, because you're never going to question, except from Janice, who asks questions like right at the
Dude,
59 mark.
dude, frickin' Janice, dude, we're trying to
Yeah,
go home, man.
freaking Janice. But it's maybe to say, what questions is your team going to ask? Or what questions should you be asking? Or what questions didn't I answer? So it's not saying, do you have any questions? Like as if you had a question, you'd be the dumb one, which I don't think most leaders don't do that. I mean, 99% of people don't do that. Some people are assholes that way, but whatever. But to ask a different question that lets it not be about them not getting it, but about them being better at explaining it. So,
Uh,
what's a question I should ask? Or what's a question that your team might ask that I haven't covered yet? Or blah, blah, blah. So that at
mm,
least relieves the pressure of being the dumb one in the room. And actually, now if you say something, you're being helpful to the rest of the group. And well, I think Janice is going to ask this question. So don't ask
mm.
it, Janice, whatever. Whatever it is. So there's one, be confident in raising your hand, and then two, how can you make it a better place to ask questions in if people aren't asking questions? When people don't ask questions, that's when they don't get it.
Mm,
Truly.
mm.
How many times you've been in a room and you're talking, and everyone's like, yep, yep, got it, got it, got it, got it. I'm like, that's how they didn't get it
Yep.
because no one said anything. So it's a two-way street. One, be comfortable asking a question. And there are lots of ways to do that. We don't have to talk about all the specifics on this, but so that you are confident in it. And that's important, to be confident in your asking questions. I don't mean to sound stupid. I mean, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. Or
Yeah.
and have instead of ending a meeting with any questions, ask a different kind of questions that will, allow people to contribute and find out their answers. Like what's your team going to ask, or what question did I miss, or whatever that is.
Mm. But I would love to dive deep on this. How do you get better or more
Yeah.
confident at asking questions?
Well, I think the first piece is there's a lot of body language in it, right? So even if you're just on a Zoom, it's sitting up, being forward, not lying back and going, huh, yeah, not feeling disinterested. If you look disinterested, no one's going to want to hear your question. Right? Like you didn't pay attention the whole time. That's the message you're sending. So one, your body language is, I've been paying attention. I'm moving forward. I have a clarifying question. So that's one way you can code your question. I have a clarifying question. So you're saying that you don't have a general, like, I wasn't paying attention question. You have a clarifying question for your role or for whatever it is. So that's number one. Number two is not to say I'm sorry and not to say this might sound stupid. Do nothing that would diminish your question, because anything that you precede the question with tells the listener what you think about your question. So this might be dumb. Yeah, it's dumb. Or I'm really sorry that I didn't get it. There's no reason to be sorry. If you were paying attention, there's no reason to be sorry. Just having that, the most important thing you can do as a participant in that meeting is leave confident in what you know. So you're doing a favor to the group when you ask a question, a clarifying question, to get more specifics so that you don't have to come back around. You're doing a favor. So understand that you're not the only one with questions. Unless you're the only new person in the room on something that's been going on for, 5 weeks in, you're at the 6th week of implementation. And so if you're in a sprint on 6 weeks and you're the 5th week and you're entering, probably no one else has, process questions. But usually the majority of the time, if you have a question, someone else has a question. So just be confident that you're asking a question that everyone's going to benefit from. If you have that point of view, if you don't diminish your question by preceding it with, basically, for lack of a better term, infantilizing or emasculating language, you're just going to be heard more. And then if you are paying attention, use your body language to demonstrate that you want to participate and you're being responsible by paying attention, all the things, then you're going to get a better answer. Sometimes it takes a lot, and particularly for women, this is a challenge. I'm sorry, we just get a long story. Need a cocktail for that. But stripping that language out. And, what team members can do for each other is, Lee, I noticed that you said I'm sorry before your question. You don't have to say, yeah, I'm sorry. You don't have to say that. How can we be allies to each other to help us be better? Because if we're better asking questions, everyone benefits.
Yeah. What came up for me, it was like, thank you. Like, don't be sorry. I had the same, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
Like that helped clarify for me, like showing that there's value and reinforcing there's value for that other person. I think that, and yeah,
that's a great ally thing, right? Oh, thank you so much, Janice. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Really do. Maybe I had a problem with Janice last week. Maybe, I don't know.
This is a safe space to let it out. We'll let out our frustrations.
Janice, don't listen.
She'll be our whipping boy today.
I don't know. Janice.
I just lost my one listener named Janice. Where do when you work with leaders, where do you find they overestimate how well they communicate?
They all overestimate how well they communicate.
Okay.
And they all do. And a part of it is because, in general, they're not saying something until it's fully formed, right? If it's a presentation, if they're leading a discussion about the vision, unless it's a real workshop situation where everyone's equal, no matter what, if you're the leader, someone comes in, they look at you to know. So they look at you to know. And unless you set it up to be more of a workshop situation, then I would say there's a lot of formation of conversation. You've figured it out in your brain, all the things. And then you say it, right? The leader would say it. But they've just spent a month thinking about this. And then they've said it and like dropping science. And so everybody gets it. But they've had a whole month to think about things, right? With all their different inputs. And if a leader puts a month into figuring out a point of view, you should count on 2 months before the other people get it. Because by definition, you're up here, you have all these other inputs, and the people around you are, for lack of a better term, specialists in their areas or have specific roles and may not see everything that you see. So for them to understand what has taken you a month to articulate, that is an unrealistic expectation that everybody could get it immediately, what you want them to get. And we get bored. A lot of leaders get bored, right? They figure it out. They're like, oh, this is a cool problem to figure out. We get hired as leaders because we solve problems. And then we're on to the next. Well, that is not the job. The job is to think about what's next, but to bring everybody on too. So you got to land it and then, you got to say it and then you got to land it. And landing is not a one and done situation. So think that's the other piece, is not having full appreciation for the fact that not only do you have to figure it out, but you have to get everybody on the same page. And those are not two the same thing.
I'm literally writing this down as a note right now. Just a good point. Well, I guess I resonate with this so much, and I've had issues, and this is something I talk with one of my business coaches about, is because, right, like, for example, leadership, as you know, whatever you specialize in, whether it's leadership or performance or mindset, so I'm like thinking about this and creating systems about my life and my philosophy and reading philosophy, and like, how do I, and then you talk to someone who hasn't been in that space and processing, or you've been doing it for 10 years, whatever, and you're like, well, duh, and they're like, not duh. Like,
Not duh.
like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Literally talking to a client the other day about this,
really?
This thing we've been working on for a year actually came to fruition yesterday. And I was talking to him on Wednesday. I said, okay, I know what you're going to do. You're going to think it's done. You just started. It is out it is out now, right? It's public now, this thing that we've been working on for almost a year. And you're going to want to go on to the next, but you cannot get bored. You have to say this word for the rest of the year. Every single time you talk out loud, you're going to say this word. He goes, oh, Lee, everyone gets it. I can assure you that we spent a year figuring this out and we've just released it. No one else gets it. Ugh, Lee. I'm like, I know. I'm sorry. We can figure out what else to do next year now, but do not get bored. And it's the hardest thing, because we've just we solved a problem and we're on to the next. You haven't solved the problem until everybody lands on the plane. Or lands on the ground. So, and on the plane doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, man, that's some critical point, and definitely resonates, with me. And I imagine leaders at any level, but especially the entrepreneurial thinking leaders, right? Who are next problem.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important to find someone like you, or find a great ops person who's going to like create systems so that it gets reinforced.
Exactly.
And you can be empowered to stay visionary.
This guy,
remind you,
this person I was talking to, he has a chief of staff who is new. He's relatively new. And the chief of, when you're, depending on your level, if you can have a chief of staff who's an integrator in the EO world, they call it integrators, who's an integrator who can actually, if you're not the integrator type, like to be the repeater, you need one, period. So who is that person? In EOS, they call it integrators. In the chief of staff role can be that way. I don't like the chief of staff idea being the gatekeeper. I like the chief of staff role being the implementer kind of thing, right? And recognizing what you're not good at is the first piece of being a good leader. So you don't spend your time on things that you shouldn't be spending your time. Like, I should not be spending time literally in Excel figuring out the P&L. Why am I spending it's not my strength. I get in there and I start diddling around with all the Excel. I'm like, what am I spending my time on this for?
Yeah.
I couldn't. I shouldn't be. So we have to understand what we're good and we're not good at it. And in general, people, it's very unusual to find a visionary integrator. Very unusual.
Yeah, totally. Well, as part of that with teams, and we mentioned, being distributed and also diverse and also generationally diverse.
Yes.
And, you've got a book about millennials in management. So let's dive into that. Like where the different generations are at current. I think it's easier to start with kind of like what you see wrong or the issues, and then we can talk about maybe solutions and how to do it right. But like, where are you seeing with your clients the things break down in terms of intergenerational communication and leadership?
I think the first thing about intergenerational conflict is that we assume this is new, and it's not. I think the first 5 pages of my first book, I quote Socrates. And there's movies, Bye Bye Birdie, which you're probably too young for, but there are literally songs and movies and books about this since, before Christ.
Yeah.
It's not a new phenomena. Number one. Number two, someone complained about us. Whatever generation you're in, someone complained. So, and by the time we get to be a place where there's younger people to complain about, it's like we sort of forgotten that we were them. So if we can just remember that, that's number one. And I think the second thing is the generations are getting compressed, and we codify generations around common, not just years, but really common situations. So boomers were after World War II because there were so many of, I'm the last year of boomer. So many
Mm.
of us. And what did that mean for the middle class, which really started after World War II and all the things. And then Gen Xers, smaller, very small generation in comparison, because that was the beginning of double income housing where the mom wasn't at home the whole time, so they didn't have as many children, and we had technology that was bringing people from farms to cities, all the things. Then millennials was the next, and the millennials being raised by boomers, mostly by boomers and older millennials, and they're basically, this is after two huge downturns in the economy where millions of people getting laid off or losing their jobs, and they were like, don't count on the man. Don't try. There's no such thing as loyalty in work. And they're like, and so the millennials are like, I don't want to be my dad. I don't want to be my mom. And they were, everybody wins soccer. Like, it was the worst possible thing you could do after kindergarten. And social promotion and grade inflation really starts with millennials because the cost of education goes up so high. Well, we did no favors for those people. And then Gen Alpha, or Gen Z, sorry, is next, is sort of magnified. Now, there's all these different things. They're driven by technology, by condition, by the economy, all the things. Bottom line, though, everybody wants the same thing. No matter who you are, no matter generation you're in, what are the commonalities? And if we can focus on what's common between us, we all want to have a role that matters. We all want to be respected. We all want to understand how we can contribute and be seen of value. Does anybody not want those things, no matter what generation you're in? No. I mean, no. They may express it differently because they have different conditions, but everyone, so if you worry about what everyone has in common, then you can manage the differences among that. And, a couple of the ones that showed up when I was writing that first book was they just quit. They just quit and they go to another job. Well, yeah, because you sucked at telling them how to make it work for you. Well, I just knew. Literally, I cannot tell you how many times. I was on a book tour for ever and a day, it felt like. My Q&A sections were longer than the actual book talk because everyone's like, well, I have this employee and she just doesn't come in on time. I was like, well, what time is on time? Well, of course it's 9:00. Like, what do you mean, of course? My time is 8:00 at my company. I have to be there by. Well, everyone knows it's 9:00. Like, she made this assumption, right? I said, well, have you ever told her that she needs to be in there? Well, she should know. So we make these generational she should knows because that's how we grew up in business. There are no shoulds. I said, well, you're going to have to go tell her that she was wrong. Well, she's been lately for 6 months. I said, well, she's going to quit on you before you get to fire her. I'm like, no, she's not. I'm like, yes, she is. You're going to tell her she's been late for 6 months. She's going to know immediately you've been talking about her for 6 months and that you let her be late for 6 months and didn't talk to her. She's going to quit on you. Lee, she quit on me. So if we think about, we're not that special.
You've built something real. The career, the title, the business, maybe all three. But ever feel simultaneously overwhelmed and bored? Like your calendar is full, your responsibilities keep growing, and yet somewhere deep down, you're no longer expanding. That's the strange reality for a lot of high performers. Not failing, not collapsing, just slowly settling for less than they're actually capable of. Because eventually talent stops being the issue. The real problem is this: nobody in your life is challenging you at the level you actually operate. I spent years sitting across from executives and owners who had every reason to be satisfied and helping them name what they were actually hungry for. A vision call is one focused conversation, no pitch, no program, just clarity on who you're becoming, what you really want next, and what's standing in your way. You don't need more motivation. You need someone who can see what you can't yet. Go to seanpatton.me/vision. That's seanpatton.me/vision and book your call today. Because the life you're capable of isn't going to wait forever.
We're not that special. And number one. Number two, everyone complained about us. Number three, everybody wants the same things: to understand their value, to understand what their role is. They don't want to be wrong. They want to contribute. And if we can focus on those things first, then it doesn't really matter how old you are.
Yeah, that's so good. It's interesting. And not this is like a DEI necessarily conversation. Maybe it is, I guess. But when there was this politically, nationally sort of like pushback, right, on some of the concepts of DI in some circles, I really, it was a lot of it was perception. And to your point, what I saw was, it's like, what direction do you want to attack? Like the human to human connection? Because you could start with, look at how different we are and like start there.
Right.
Or and then be like, but now let's get together and make those differences work
Right.
together. Or you can start with like, how are we all the same?
Yeah.
Establish that, and then look at, well, let's celebrate our different strengths and differences, how that contributes to the team. So it's just like, is it inside out or outside in?
I think it's both and.
Yeah, I think it's both and. I do think, to your point though, that the team, if you're going to create an organization and a team, it has to kind of start with like the team first. And maybe this is my military background, but like I always say that for every mission set, there's an ideal culture.
Yes.
Right? So you have to know what your mission is first. You have to like establish a culture,
doesn't
because
matter unless you know where you're going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, I mean, the ideal culture for a creative graphic design and marketing team office is different than nuclear engineers.
We hope so.
We hope so, right? Those are very different cultures. So if you start with like, what is going to be the best, and then there might be, it also helps you recognize like, maybe there's some people that aren't a good fit, and that's cool too. But if you don't ever establish it,
a better fit.
Yeah, it might just like, it becomes this amorphous moving target you can never kind of nail down.
There's a woman who I work with, and she was just complaining about this person on her team. She's just not, I just want something more creative. I just need her to be more creative. And I'm like, okay, Julie, no, that is a square peg in a round hole. She is not a creative person. She is not skilled in graphic design. She has no interest in graphic design. And you want her output to be like top-notch, level setting graphic design. You are asking someone who does not have the chops to do a job she is not well suited for. Tell me what she's good at. And she names it. Do. I'm like, have her do that. Have her do that. Right? Don't ask her to do things she's not good at. Would I ask you to run an Excel sheet? Looking at myself, God, no, because I know what you do when you do that. So, we have these on that. Just because we have a job we need to get filled, a person that we put in there because we thought they might work out, they may not work out for that role. Doesn't mean they're not valuable, right? So my team is, today it's much more diverse than it was, 10 years ago, easily. We have many more people who are from first generation immigrants or first generation Americans, many 6 out of 25 who are first generation college graduates, and therefore first generation white collar workers and their families. And their expectations are so different. They don't expect to have a mentor. They don't expect all these things that someone who grew up in a white collar workforce would just go, yeah, I better have my freaking mentor. They just don't have the same construct. They didn't grow up around the table with it. So we've had to set here's what you should expect discussions, and here's what we expect of you. Number one. Number two is we have everybody go through probably 4 different assessments. One is everyone does Myers-Briggs because that's pretty universal wherever you go, and then Strength Finders, and then the Languages of Appreciation book, which is, I can't remember who it is, but the same people who wrote the 5 Languages of Love wrote the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the workplace, because we know that teams that feel appreciated outperform those that don't every single time. And that's just profit. If you feel appreciated, you outperform those who don't, because you're not grinding on anything. You know that you're valuable. Nothing's grinding in you to make you efficient. So that drops down to the bottom line, 9 to 15% across the board. But it also says, even though we might look the same, we are at the time when I first started, we were all white and over 40, I think. Now everybody's, we have a much more, people are 25 or 22 or whatever. So we did that so we could say we might look the same, but we all have different strengths and weaknesses, or opportunities and challenges, whatever you want to say it. So if you can acknowledge that just because we look the same, we have differences. When someone looks different or has a different condition than you enters the chat, then it's easier to acknowledge their strengths and weaknesses too, not based on their differences, but based on the fact that we all have differences. So, and then also setting up your teams that way. And why do we have 4 introverts on this account, which is run on the client side by someone who's like cheerleader? It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. You got to be a good match, right? In the client world, you could have the best expertise possible, but if you can't have the great chemistry with the client, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because you're harder to work with. And the whole point on when you're an agency or consultant or whatever, you got to be easy to work with, because there are lots of us. And we're not there to make their lives harder. We're there to make their lives better. And it might be hard because we're asking to do new things, particularly as a coach, right? But if you're an agency doing a function, you got to be easy to work with. So you got to match chemistry. And that's just the reality of the business. but I want to work on that. Well, you're going to be in the back seat then, because she's not going to appreciate you. It's not because you're not great. It's because she's not going to appreciate you, or he's not going to appreciate you, because that's not the way she works. And they don't have to move to us. We need to move to them. So that was a lot there, Sean. Sorry, I sort of went all over the place.
No, that was awesome. That was super valuable. It's funny how much of what you're saying, I'm like instantly be like, oh yeah, that client, or this, thing. I'm just noticing these situations as you bring them up so much. And I just want to call out, you mentioned, you know, appreciation goes straight to the bottom line.
Straight to the bottom line.
That hits. Like if you,
we're humans, right? And let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that means. So, right. So when you feel appreciated, you don't worry about not being valuable. You don't worry about your self-worth. You're not grinding on being pissed. Because if we're upset or mad or that feel something was unfair, or whatever the things, what do? It's all internal. It's all bitching and moaning and grinding. And maybe we don't say it out loud, but it's all in our body. And that just drags us down. That drags down our efficiency. What should take 1 takes 5, whatever, right? So if you feel appreciated, you got none of that getting in your way, right? None of it. And that's just meaning that, so here's a better example, actually, because there's data on this. So in a workforce, if someone feels that if they're stressed about financial insecurity, the research says that they lose 7 hours a week in the workplace because of that stress, because they're so worried, like, I can't lose my job. How am I going to pay for that? How am I going to do, that is just real. And usually, therefore, it's the people on the bottom of the ecosystem who are getting paid the least, right? So you're losing 7 hours a week. So that's almost 20% of your work. So that's, 19%? You're losing 19% of their possible efficiency baked in because they're stressed financially. So what if those people were actually paid a living wage? So if you went from $15 an hour to $22 an hour, that's $7. It's a lot. I mean, not really, but you do the math. Well, you've just gained, what is that? You went from 19% loss to full capacity. You did not raise your cost by 19%. That's not $7 is not 19%, and they're not worried about it. So you're not losing 7 hours. So you've got to maybe peak, but you've removed that problem by, if you just add people to the mix, right, to make up the loss, you've increased your costs and actually keep dropping your efficiency because you're adding less efficient people all the time.
Yeah.
Well, if you take that to appreciate, so that's the monetary thing that has been measured. 7, person who's under financial stress, up to about 7 hours a week, which is 19% of efficiency. Same thing is true. And so you move that over to appreciation for people who may not be at the bottom of the chain. Maybe they feel financially good, but they have different aspirations. They want different things. And they're grinding like that sucks. Anytime you put that negative energy into your day, you're dropping your efficiency. You have to get over that hurdle every single time.
Yeah.
If you can find a way to, and everybody wants, unfortunately, we're all human and we don't experience appreciation the same way. Some people would die if you called them out in a meeting and said, "Woohoo, go, Sean." Oh my God, that's terrible. And that would make them shrivel up. Other people are like, "Where are my kudos?"
Yeah.
Send a note or whatever it is. And that book, that assessment really helps figure it out so that you can acknowledge people and have other people know that they were acknowledged, but make it more personal, because in the end, we're all people. And that's the unfortunate thing. This job would be so much easier without all these people.
Yeah. Oh man. This has so much power today. I really appreciate you and the work you're doing and what you brought to our audience today, Lee. As people listen to this, we'll put links to your company and that sort of thing in the show notes. But if they want to get a hold of you, like, are you active on any social platforms, or is there an email, or how do they contact you?
You can, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. Frankly, there's only, I don't know, there's another person. Anyway, I'm really easy to find. So you'll have the link to my company, or leecaraher.com, or Lee or L Caraher at Double Forte email. I'll answer it. If you if you send me an email, I just ask you that you put like Sean Patton in the email subject line, so I know to actually pay attention to it.
There you go. That's the secret. Well, thanks so much, Lee. It's been super fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Thanks for being a part of the No Limit Leadership family. This isn't just a podcast. We're building a movement of no limit leaders driven to unlock our greatness and lead the world forward. If this made you think or gave you something useful, please, 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 right now, go hit follow and then share it with one leader you believe in. Challenge limits, develop leaders, fuel greatness.